What's up, guys? It's your boy Seth here with Renaissance Resurrection. Today we're going to be talking about the 7 steps to scaling profitably in your business. Let's talk about that in 3, 2, 1. Alright, so I have very intimate experience with, playing that teeter-totter pendulum game of like, okay, yes, we're increasing our revenues, but we're also bringing on new staff and acquiring new expenses. So how do we make sure that our expenses aren't exceeding this growth in revenue? And so that's kind of a game that you have to play as an entrepreneur is my growth justifying my increase in my overhead? And so I'm going to show you guys how over the last year, I've taken my business from $350,000 in sales to over $1 million in sales, but the whole while I've increased my profitability just like I've increased my sales. Also, one thing I'm going to say, if you're watching this video and you're not super familiar with financial terms and you're not super financially literate, I would go check out my YouTube video called Different Types of Business Income, because that'll really help you to understand a lot of the terminology that I'm going to be using today, because this is a little bit more of a high level video as far as financial intelligence goes in the expansion of a business. Now, before I get into the first step in the system that I use and I have used over the last year in growing the business by about 300%, I want to address a misconception when it comes to scaling. So a lot of people think of it in terms of like, how much does my business need to be making in order to justify this increase in overhead? And that's really not how you should be thinking. You shouldn't be thinking from the top line and then going down. You shouldn't be thinking like, what do my sales need to be in order to increase my overhead to do what I want to do? Your thoughts should really be bottom line up. And so I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But just know, if you're thinking about it in terms of what does the business need to be making in order to justify the increase in overhead, you're definitely going about it wrong. So let me show you what I mean here. So the very first thing in the system to scaling profitably is you have to start from the bottom line and you have to ask yourself, how much net income do you want to make at what net margin? So what this is going to do is it's going to build you up from the bottom. Instead of saying I want to do 100,000 in sales, you got to say I want to do 10,000 in net income at a 10% margin. See? So let me just show you what that looks like. So say you're say you're a business and you say, okay, I want to do $10,000 in net income. Actually, I'm going to write it down here for you guys because, like I said, I'm working bottom line up, not top line down. So I want to do $10,000 in net income at a 10% net margin. So basically what that means is that after every single expense has been paid out, every single operating expense, all my overhead, all my cost of goods sold, all my payroll, all my taxes, literally everything has been paid out. This is just money coming back to the business. I want it to be $10,000 in a month, okay? At a 10% margin. So your net margin is what percentage of your total sales is the money that you're keeping. So what you have to do after you determine what you want your net income to be and at what net margin, what you have to do is the second step is to multiply up to your projected ideal gross revenue. So if you have a 10% net margin, that means your gross revenue is 100% of your profits, right? So you would have to multiply times 10 to get to 100%. So you would take your 10,000 times 10 to get to 100,000. That would be your gross revenue in this situation, right? That's how you would figure that out. And again, like I said, I know there's a lot of financial terms that I'm using here, so if you aren't following along, I would seriously go watch that video, the different types of business income that I have on my channel. Just look it up. That's exactly what it's titled. So that's the very first step, is you have to figure out how much net income do you want on the bottom line and at what net margin, and then you need to multiply up to your projected ideal gross revenue. These are the first 2 steps. Now, I'm going to move on to the third step. Yeah, and something that I wanted to include in that previous clip that I forgot to, I'll mention it now, is the importance of maintaining your margins and scaling. And let me show you what that looks like on here, right? And I really need to get a dry erase marker. or eraser. But anyway, say you're a $100,000 business, say you're doing $100,000 in sales in a month, and you're at a 10% net margin. Well, that means you're doing $10,000 in net income that you're keeping to the business, like we just said, right? Now let's say you scale up to $200,000 in sales, but because of a massive increase in overhead, in order to be able to get that output, your net margin gets compressed to 5%. Well, guess what that means? That means on the bottom line, kind of sucks, you're still just making that original $10,000 in net income, but you're working twice as hard for it. So that's no fun. Everybody, it's good. It's one thing to make money. It's another thing to figure out how to keep money. And I'll talk about that in a later step. But that just goes to show you the importance of keeping your margins and not getting them compressed in the process of scaling. So, yeah. But anyway, so now moving on to the third step in ensuring profitability in scaling. The third step is to audit your current expenses, specifically your operating expenses. But basically this one's really simple. You got to figure out, what are my current recurring operating expenses? Don't include your one-offs. So you just got to figure out, okay, at the current phase that I'm at, what are we paying in gas for company vehicles? What are we paying for insurance? What are we paying for rent? What are we paying in our marketing budget? What is our payroll and the taxes that we're paying? The things that you are getting billed for every single month, you have to figure that number out. I can't really give you a system to do that because I can't see your financial statements. But the easiest way and how I do it is I just print off my own profit and loss statement from QuickBooks, and then from that point you can map out and figure out, okay, here's how much we're paying in boom, 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 boom. All these different categories that are, can't stress enough, recurring monthly operating expenses. You want to see what's going to be hitting your account every single month. Alright, and then the fourth step, once you have figured out your current operating expenses and you've audited that, is to figure out your new operating expenses that will be incurred as a result of scaling. So you might be in a position where you're like, we're at this level, but we're growing and we're bringing on new people and we're getting new offices, and you're going to be incurring new expenses as a result of scaling, right? So you have to figure out exactly how much is that going to be. How many hours is your new hire going to be working at what rate? How much is your new office going to be in rent per month? What new interest payments or what increase in interest payments are you going to have in any debt you're carrying? You have to look down the line and figure out, like, okay, where are we at right now in our expenses, and then with where we're going and the people that we're bringing on and the expansion that we're experiencing, what are our operating expenses going to increase by? So that is the fourth step in scaling profitably, is to get a clear picture of what your operating expenses are going to be increasing by. Now, once you have figured that out, the next step in the system for the 7 steps to scaling profitably is to figure out what your current margins are, because like I mentioned earlier, you need to make sure you're maintaining, ideally finding ways to expand your margins, but ideally at least maintaining your margins in the process of expansion. So the main 3 margins that you need to figure out, because there's a whole bunch of different types of margins, but we're going to focus on the main 3, is your gross margin, your gross profit margin, your operating profit margin, and your net profit margin. So basically the way you figure these out, I'll grab my green marker, it'll be a little bit easier to see. So the way you figure these out is your gross profit, I'm not going to take the time to write every single one of them out, gross profit divided by gross revenue times 100, your operating profit divided by your gross revenue times 100, and then your net income divided by your gross revenue times 100. So what this will do is it'll give you a percentage to see, okay, what percent of our sales are we keeping after we pay our costs of goods sold? What percentage of our sales are we keeping after we pay our costs of goods sold and our operating expenses? And then it'll give you a percentage of what percentage of our sales are we keeping after we pay everything and our taxes. So that way, once you figure out your margins, you can be like, okay, we either need to increase them or we at least need to find a way to maintain them in the process of scaling, but you need to figure out where you're currently at. And just as a rule of thumb, a good net margin is 15 to 25%, a good operating margin is 30 to 45%, and a good gross profit margin is 55 to 65%. Again, if you're unfamiliar with these terms, go watch my YouTube video, different types of business income. I break all of this down in depth. I don't have the time to do it in this video. Alright, and then once you've figured out what your margins are, the next step, sixth step to scaling profitably, is to step through the different types of business income with your updated recurring expenses to see if you maintain profitability. So, again, the types of business income that I'm going to be talking about are the types of business income that I talk about in my YouTube video, different types of business income. So, basically you're going to figure out, okay, say you're that $10,000, or say you're that business that wants to do $10,000 at a 10% net margin, so you know that your gross revenue is going to be $100K. So once you figure out, okay, well my gross profit margin is 53%. Okay, cool, so that means that your gross profit would be 53K. Alright, and then you know that, say your operating margin is 40%. So that would mean that your operating profit would be 40K. What am I missing here? Oh, yeah, I have to actually draw the margin in. So your operating margin is 40%. So your operating profit, so your operating profit would be 40K. And then you know that your net margin is 10%. So you know that your net income would be 10K, right? So that's your projections. So you have to map out all your projections. Now, what you would really need to do is, this is where the mapping out of your current your updated operating expenses would come in. So really what you would have to do is you would have to look at your gross profit number, and you would have to subtract out your updated recurring operating expenses. So that when you went through and you said, okay, what is my new hire going to be at with their hourly rate, at the amount of hours they're going to be working, what's the rent increase of our new office going to be, what, just whatever your new operating expenses you found were going to be from as a result of expansion, that's where you're going to have to take it out of your gross profit, because that's what you're going to be paying your operating expenses out of. So, say you found that your operating expenses is going to decrease your operating margin from 40% to say 37%, because you're going to decrease your margins by 3% while you're expanding and you're increasing those new expenses. Well, now you know that your operating profit would be actually $37,000. Okay, so then you have to figure out what expenses are going to be coming out in your going from your operating profit to your net margin, taxes and whatnot, and then you'll have to figure out what your new net income would be based upon those new expenses, and you just got to kind of teeter-totter and play with, okay, well, what do we need to increase these income metrics by individually to get where we want to get here on the bottom line. And the way that you can do that is the seventh step. So once you kind of map this out and you step through the different types of business income to see if you'll maintain profitability and maintain margins with your updated recurring operating expenses, the questions that you have to ask, if your margins will be getting overly compressed and you'll be hurting your net income as a result of expansion, the questions that you have to ask as a business owner are, what business systems do I need to put in place to make things more efficient so that I can maximize my people, my resources? What software can I put in place to automate things so that we can save time and become more efficient? And what people do I need to scale this profitably? What new hires do I need to make? What new positions do I need to create in order to make sure that my business maintains the efficiency to keep my margins where they need to be, in order to not only increase my revenues on the top line, but increase my profits on the bottom line? So this is just me speaking from my experience. This is how I break everything down as far as scaling my business. Again, we went from 350,000 in sales last year to $1 million in sales this year, and we're not any more stressed than we were before. So, if anything, it's better. So, but that's just a result of me being able to process this, to get through this mentally. And it really all comes down to, if you're a business owner and you want to scale and you want to grow a big business, you have to have the financial intelligence to be able to look at your financial statements and figure out what's going on and what directions things need to be moving in. Because at the end of the day, man, scaling is just math. Business is just math. It's just a math equation. It's just, if you can make 10,000, you can make 20,000. If you can make 20,000, you can make 40,000. It never ends. There's no limit on how much you can make. It's just a matter of how business smart are you about your money, and what system, software, and people are you smart enough to put in place to make things efficient enough to scale profitably. That's all it is. So, that's all I have for you guys today. I really hope this video helps you out if you are an entrepreneur that's trying to scale your business, but you're trying to figure out the finances of it. Again, I make videos on finance content, tech content, personal development, a whole bunch of other stuff. Just check out my channel, Renaissance Resurrection. And yeah, until next time, guys, this has been Seth. I really hope I helped you out, and if you want to connect with me on social media, I have my link tree with all my platforms down in the bio. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, I think that's all of them. So, alrighty guys, well, that's everything I have for you. I'm out!